Hey Bowtie Nation, Joseph Hogue here, and all you out there in the nation have heard me talk about SpaceX recently and the pre-IPO investment through Dizraptor, but I wanted to highlight it in its own video because despite the market crashing 25% so far this year, despite the fact that even traditional safety investments like bonds have lost money, SpaceX seems to be holding up and even producing a positive upside. In fact, Dizraptor has extended its investment window into the company until October 30th for a share priced at $83 each and a valuation of $152 billion for the company. That's already 20% above the company's valuation of $127 billion in its most recent funding round. That's just 5 months ago in May. Whereas most private companies are having to raise new funding at lower valuations because of the market's chaos, what's usually referred to as a down round in the private market, SpaceX has now more than doubled its valuation over the last year and has raised $10 billion in total funding from investors. That makes it the world's second highest valued private company, behind only TikTok owner ByteDance. And now watching the news, it's easy to see why SpaceX has been able to avoid that drop in valuation that we've seen across the stock market and the pre-IPO market. SpaceX Starlink internet has now reached all 7 continents, reaching a research station in Antarctica last month. The internet service is served through thousands of low Earth orbit satellites and carries the limitless potential of really reaching anywhere, even where land use restrictions like national parks and mountains make traditional internet impossible. In fact, SpaceX teamed up with T-Mobile in August to expand its coverage beyond what's even possible with the carrier. Even with the most powerful LTE and 5G wireless networks, over 500,000 square miles in the US alone is inaccessible by Wi-Fi. The Starlink system could one day provide internet access to any part of the world, even on that cruise your wife is begging you to take her on, but you don't want to pay for the $1 a minute charged for internet. And of course, the constant progress in the Starship program, from the record firing of Raptor engines to the upcoming orbital launch, a rocket with awesome potential, according to Northrop Grumman exec Rob Hague, and that could make space travel as easy as commercial air travel, according to Musk himself. So today I wanted to dissect the company, show you not only what SpaceX is all about, but use it as an example for those pre-IPO investments from the investor's perspective. What indicators to look at, and how to evaluate the potential and the risks to your investment. Now, before we begin, I do want you to understand here, right now, only accredited investors are able to invest on Dizraptor. It sucks, and I hope it changes eventually, but because of rules by the Security and Exchange Commission, the SEC, only those with $1 million net worth or a certain level of income can invest in these pre-IPO companies. Now, I did show you the options last week for non-accredited investors, so I'm going to leave a link to that video in the description, but watch through this one because investing in these pre-IPO deals on any platform is going to mean knowing what to watch for and how to invest. When you click through the Dizraptor app, you'll find the SpaceX deal along with the investment window to October 30th, the valuation, and the price per share. Click through and you're going to find the complete analysis for this offer. This first section on business growth phase is going to be your first step into pre-IPO analysis, and one that's going to determine that level of risk and return in the investment. And companies just starting out raising seed funding to just develop their ideas are going to be much more risky and could be many more years for an IPO exit for investors. And conversely, those in the later stages, especially those already generating revenue, are going to be much less risky and potentially closer to an exit. Now, obviously, SpaceX is much further along here than most other pre-IPO companies you're going to find. The company is already generating revenue from multiple products and then scaling those for growth while developing others. Product is often the decisive factor for investors, investing in what they believe in or what they use. It can be a great strategy, but you do need to understand the company's product. Liking the flavor of Campbell's chicken noodle soup just isn't enough reason to invest. You need to understand that product, the supply chain, and its competitive advantage over the alternatives to get a sense of why it's investable. That can be tough with these highly technical products. This is rocket science after all, but the app makes it easy to understand the different stages of products and overview for the company. SpaceX has made a series of firsts in its industry, the first to launch, orbit, recover, and reuse the same rocket, as well as the first to ferry passengers into space. It's also got a range of breakthrough projects, including carrying NASA astronauts to the International Space Station and delivering satellites into orbit. Now, Elon's own goal is to take people to Mars, so a pretty lofty goal there, but the Starship and Starlink projects have both met early success and have monetization on the horizon. Starship is a massive next-generation rocket that can launch cargo and passengers into space. And Starship prototyped a high-altitude test flight in May of last year and is set to test orbital flight in the next couple of months. And the company has already launched more than 3,000 Starlink satellites. The network has more than 400,000 users in 14 countries participating in a public beta, with service priced at $110 a month. And the system continues to expand its coverage globally, and service now available in more than 30 countries. And this market potential and analysis is where I spent most of my time as a venture capital analyst, going through the industry research to determine that growth and then how the company fit into that future. You see, even as an also-ran company in a booming industry can be a great investment, so you really want to put in your time here. Finding that best-of-breed company within the high-growth industry, and that's the kind of investment that creates family legacies. For its part, SpaceX is operating in a number of large and growing markets. A deep space exploration among them, a market estimated to reach $700 billion by 2030, according to Morgan Stanley. Others, you've got space launch services, expected to reach $32 billion by 2027, and satellite internet expected to reach $19 billion by Allied Research. And within that broader aerospace and communications industry is very strong growth, fueled by geopolitical tension and technological advances. The U.S. defense budget is seeing a dramatic increase, with the annual National Defense Authorization Act supporting $778 billion in funding. The Biden administration has requested a $26 billion budget for NASA next year, which would be the highest funding amount ever for the agency, and it's clear that the government just wants to expand its focus into aerospace defense to counter both Russia and China. Now, while I spent most of my time researching venture investments, the financials were arguably the hardest part of the analysis. Well, private companies just aren't obligated to disclose their financial results. When they do seek venture or private funding, they'll often release some kind of pro forma numbers, but rarely the kind of audited statements you see with those publicly traded stocks. With these pre-IPO investments, it's even more difficult because company insiders or management might make some statements on revenue or clients, but it's difficult for the average investor to verify that data. The best thing you can do is look at what's publicly available and make sure that it's within reason. And the last reported revenue for SpaceX we have was back in 2019 with $2 billion. Morgan Stanley analysts believe Starlink, which was launched that year, is alone currently generating over $500 million in recurring revenue on its subscriptions, though. Now, valuations change with each funding round. The idea is that even though the company is bringing on more investors with more funding, it's growing so that each investor's share is still larger than what it was in previous rounds. The pie is getting larger, so to speak, so everyone's slice is a little larger, even though it has to be shared among more people. As of August, SpaceX has raised a total of $10 billion in funding. And during the funding round last year, the company raised a nearly $1.2 billion at a $74 billion valuation. In the following October, SpaceX held a secondary sale of existing shares for a valuation of $100.3 billion, making it the second most valuable private company in the world. And the company had another funding round in May of this year, sending the valuation to $127 billion, or estimated at $70 a share at that time. I do want to highlight the risks here because I just don't think that investors spend enough time in understanding the risks, not just to the specific company, but also to pre-IPO investing in general. The risks here touch on some company-specific risks. Operating in a high-risk, high-growth market, space exploration is not a cheap industry, and SpaceX burns through cash with those development costs. Given the increase in interest rates, that makes debt funding all the more expensive for really any company, especially those pre-IPO companies with constant cash needs. And while I do think SpaceX is a best-of-breed company, it does face competition in all of its business segments. Its Starlink satellite network competes with Amazon, which is planning to launch its own Kuiper network of more than 3,000 satellites, though it doesn't have yet production plans or has any of them launched. And for that deeper space exploration and Musk's dream of taking people to Mars someday, there are an innumerable amount of questions that need answered, like radiation, thin atmospheres, and just the pesky question of food and water. All of these will need to be answered, tested, and then tested again before the company can even talk of revenue on them. But investors are in good company, and SpaceX has the funding momentum it needs to answer many, if not all, of these questions. Elon Musk is a master of raising capital, and the list of early investors is enough to inspire confidence in the company. Early investors include Fidelity, Google Ventures, and Peter Thiel's founder funds, as well as Bank of America and NASA itself. I know it's a lot to work over, but the Dizraptor app does make it easier, laying out each section for pre-IPO investors and the analysis you need. It's the same kind of high return potential I helped find when I worked for venture capital, but now accessible to investors through a simple app. Check out the Dizraptor app with the link below and that SpaceX deal open until October 30th, or click on the video to the right for a step-by-step to investing in these pre-IPO companies. Don't forget to join the Let's Talk Money community by tapping that subscribe button and clicking the bell notification.